Applications are going to come out, I would assume, sometime later this year, but I'll delegate that to Pragya. So if you are interested in the kind of work that we're doing, work much like the one that you're witnessing on the screen now, definitely sign up because it is very rewarding. It's fantastic. Okay, that's enough about me. So let me give you a little bit of the focus. Today, we're going to focus on advocacy, but advocacy through what? Advocacy through government relations, particularly. And why are we taking this approach? Well, on the one hand, it's best to teach what you know so that, well, you have a better sense of the material and so that you can instruct people to a higher degree. But more importantly, as an audience member, learning how to take the government relations approach to advocacy is actually very helpful because at the end of the day, no matter what you do, at a grassroots level, at a professional level, if you want to take action and if you want to change the rules of society, be they policies, bylaws, um, acts, you're going to need to be able to relate well with government officials and get them to change their mind. So that's why we're going to focus on this particular component. What's on the agenda? Well, in part one, which is the part that we're in now, we have 5 subcomponents. We're going to start by giving everybody an overview of advocacy strategy. That's going to involve the planning specifically your advocacy goals. Then we're going to transition to learning. And here we're really going to focus on how to learn what the officials' priorities are. The officials in this case being public officials. You may also hear them referred to as audiences or audience members. It's all part of the same group. Then we're going to go to alignment. And for alignment, this is going to be really, really interesting because this is where the magic happens. If you ever wondered how it is that people, show up at the government office or show up at a meeting and leave with, a bill signed, commitment to funding, this is really the process driving that outcome. So it's super exciting. I highly encourage you to tune into part 3. Delivery comes next. And for delivery, we're really going to talk about what you can do to have an effective pitch, an effective advocacy deliverable, be it a protest, be it a meeting, be it a town hall, whatever. That's what we're going to talk about there. And lastly, compliance. Compliance, I think, is an overlooked component, especially in our spaces as young people, because we always think, okay, I'm going to talk to whoever, whenever, and nothing's really going to come of it. I don't need to obey any rules. But the truth is, if you're getting paid to advocate, chances are you're going to come across some lobbying legislation that you may not be aware of. So rather than going through the headache of having to file late and potentially incur some penalties, we're just going to go through the compliance portion, learn about it, and make sure that you're on the up and up. So let's hop into the first part, planning. To plan effectively, what are we really looking at? Well, we need to start by understanding the outcomes. Any meeting that you have with a public official, any interaction that you have with a public official needs to do one of 2 things. It needs to secure commitments to get their support or to secure their opposition. So in context, what does this mean? Well, if you, for instance, care about reducing poverty, then passing bills like the Pharmacare Act would be in everybody's best interest because, one moment, diabetes medication is expensive. And one of the areas that people of low resources that have family members who have diabetes struggle with is obviously financing this medication. So as a poverty reduction or even a healthcare advocate, you would want to get your public official support for this particular bill. Great. What about opposition? Well, opposition can come in any shape and size, but since we're talking about legislation, let's stick with legislation. So once upon a time, Canada had 2 streams of funding for housing, right? The Canada Social Transfer, the Canada Health Transfer. And the Canada Social Transfer used to be nice and chunky, this really healthy, wonderful piece of funding that the federal government gave all of the lower levels of government, the provinces. And obviously, over the years, there have been many, many cuts to the CST, the Canada Social Transfer, and it's been disastrous. So realistically, if we could go back in time, if we could apply these lessons retroactively, we would want to oppose the gutting of this very essential funding package. That's the kind of opposition that we're talking about here. Now, with that in mind, knowing what we want to advocate for or get support for or oppose and advocate against, what does the plan actually look like? Well, we're going to have to start over here, talking about the audience. The audience matters a lot because at the end of the day, the public official that you speak to or even don't speak to needs to be very intentional. Because if it isn't, you're wasting your time. And worse yet, you're wasting their time, which means that the follow-up meeting, if it even happens, will not be very receptive. So what do we need to bear in mind to make sure that our outcomes are very positive? First thing, we want to consider the public official's station. What does this mean? Their station, as you can see by the diagram, is kind of like where they sit on the hierarchy, right? And I know that we don't really like to talk about hierarchies, but in this case, it is really important because dealing with backbenchers can be great. And in fact, one of the examples that I'm going to give you involves a backbencher. But at the end of the day, wouldn't it be better if you could just jump the line, go straight into the high-level decision maker, the person that really calls the shots? Of course. So bear in mind the station. It doesn't necessarily have to be super hierarchical like minister or even prime minister and backbencher. No, it could be fairly straightforward. Consider the committees that they're a part of. Consider whether they're a critic of a specific topic area. And obviously in the example, I'll walk you through what this looks like. But the station really just refers to what is their title, what is their purpose, kind of like what's their occupation. Okay. The second component is visibility. You definitely want all of your advocacy to involve very visible figures. So think about the most visible figures in Canadian politics. It really could be anybody. I mean, let's think about the leaders. The leaders of any party are going to be very visible. So if you want to talk to Jagmeet Singh, Trudeau, Pierre, doesn't really matter whom, you're going to want to make sure that you're targeting a visible person, because if you get their support, their visibility is going to ensure that your particular outcome gets the recognition that it deserves. So we talked about pharmacare. Let's stick with pharmacare. Right now, you have the coalition of governments federally that is promoting this bill. Why does this matter? It matters because now you have two teams, two parties that are pushing for the same thing. And yes, they have their differences, right? So the NDP opposes pharmacare on several principles because it omits key health measures. The Liberals, they support it almost wholeheartedly because it was their initiative. At the end of the day, you have these two teams that you could target. So if you care about advancing pharmacare, ensuring that it expands and it grows and it gets more supports, looking at them and seeing who the most visible allies are is going to be a huge asset to you so that you can drive your strategy forward. The third component, the network. So I've already kind of teased this out a little bit, but as you're considering what your advocacy goal is going to be, the network is going to matter a lot, because consider the two teams that I just mentioned, those two parties. Within these two parties, you have a vast array of very well-networked individuals. So you can think about which of those networks you really want to tap into if you want to secure funding, support, general commitment, even from the media, even from nonprofit networks, you name it, to drive your advocacy goals forward. And so the networks that you bear in mind are ultimately going to make or break the pitch. They're going to make or break the plan. And I know that this can sound a little bit daunting, but don't worry, there is a very clear structure that we're going to walk you through in just a moment so that we can kind of distill all of these components and make them easy to navigate. But before we get there, let's talk about the last consideration, which is their disposition. And when we think about disposition, just think about how friendly they are, how supportive the official is going to be. The best way to do this is going to be to learn the audience very, very well. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. But I want us to kind of just take a little snapshot, mental or real, if you want to take a screenshot, to really understand each of these four subcomponents. Because in practice, it's going to look a little like this. And it's strange that the photo's cropped here. I assure you there was a photo. Maybe it's just my screen. But no matter what, here you're going to see a photo of Lisa Marie Barron. Who is Lisa Marie Barron? Why does she matter? Well, Lisa Marie Barron matters because in this case, we are looking to engender support for electoral reform. In retrospect, I probably should have stuck with pharmacare, but oh well. Electoral support, why does it matter? At the end of the day, this is an initiative that matters, especially for youth, because the reason why our favorite political leaders aren't winning is because first past the post sucks a lot. And there's a lot of consensus on this. So if we wanted to change things, we need allies that on the one hand, support our vision, but on the other hand, want to lead the charge themselves. And Lisa Marie is just your gal. Because Lisa Marie recently put forward a motion, and this has actually been something on her plate that's been kind of like a long time coming. But she put out this motion to essentially assemble a citizens committee on electoral reform, to have the people, essentially like a grassroots movement, lead the charge on shattering first past the post and paving the way for a much better and inclusive electoral system. With that context in mind, let's look at some of the other components. Okay, so what is the station? Like I mentioned, when you're thinking about the station, you want to consider somebody that's the key decision maker. Lisa Marie is not necessarily a key decision maker. She is a junior MP. She was recently elected in 2021. Okay. But as a junior MP, the advantage that you get, which is why I chose her, is that you get somebody that really wants to prove themselves. When you're new to caucus, when you're new to electoral politics, you want to start establishing your legacy. So you're going to have all that passion, all that vigor, all of that campaign zeal behind you, pushing you to drive these key issues forward. Whereas a more senior and established elected official might not. Although the trade-off there, of course, is their experience, their network, and likely their higher station as a result of their seniority. So do bear in mind that it's a balancing act. But for now, this is all illustrative. So bear in mind that she's a junior MP. Visibility. She's a very vocal advocate, and this plays to our favor because we want to make sure that we're partnering with somebody or that we're talking to somebody that isn't just going to have the meeting and say, yeah, I'll support you. If you do this, I'll maybe, help vote in your favor, et cetera. No. You want somebody that's going to bring the charge to, in this case, Ottawa and say, hello, Parliament, hello, Canada. I support this bill. My constituents have helped me develop this motion, et cetera, et cetera. So the visibility is A+ there. The third part over here, the network. So she's part of the NDP caucus. In addition to this, there are a lot of other networks that she's a part of. For instance, she's a strong disability advocate. She's a very strong healthcare advocate. And so if you go through her public profile, you'll be able to see many of the networks and connections that she has. And so if we wanted to move away from electoral reform to talk about disability justice, that would be a huge win to record on kind of like our notes and figure out how she could kind of fit into our overall advocacy plan. The last part is the disposition. So like I said, the disposition is whether they support you or not. She's very friendly. She's very supportive towards our target, which is electoral reform over here. And as a result, like she's a no-brainer, right? Like all of these boxes are kind of being checked off, obviously with this exception. But like I mentioned, that energy, that passion is definitely there. So she's a great choice. If anybody's wondering, Lisa represents Nanaimo Ladysmith. So she's out in BC. A little hard to talk to if you're based here in Ontario, but I'm sure that you can give her office a call. In any event, this is just an example, but it's something that really underscores how you can apply the methodology behind your advocacy plan. Let's flesh this out a little bit more, because now we have the four main subcomponents, but we also have to consider the political context. Whenever you're considering political context, you need to bear in mind three things. The first is the climate. When we're talking about climate, what does climate really mean? Well, your political climate kind of means the general attitudes that your leaders are bearing in mind. So right now, the focus is on two things, maybe three, but generally two things, if you're looking at this at a federal level. The first thing is the election. The election is right around the corner, a year, in the future, but in political terms, that's nothing. It might as well take place tomorrow. So the election is at the forefront of everybody's minds. Everybody wants to get reelected. Everybody wants to maintain their seats. And the party leaders especially want to grow the size of their caucus. First thing to consider in the political climate. The second thing is the theme du jour, the main issue. What is the main issue in Canada right now? It's the cost of living. And ever since we exited the pandemic, it's been the cost of living. So whenever you hear politicians complain about housing prices, about the cost of living, obviously, about welfare spending and the fact that it's caused inflation. All of these things are part of the affordability crisis that is really animating many of the policies you see in the political climate. So that kind of gives you a flavor of what to look for. The second aspect when you're considering the context is public sentiment. So the public sentiment is, how do people feel? People obviously feel the pinch. They know that it's really hard for them right now to afford many of their daily necessities. Groceries objectively are expensive. Housing is objectively unaffordable, and people are reacting rationally to that unaffordability. So we need to keep that public sentiment in mind whenever we're trying to frame our issue, and especially when we're trying to time our issue. Because if the issue is out of sync with the public sentiment, you're done. It's not going to work. It can be out of sync with the political climate because, trust me, most advocacy is. Right now, there has been a lot of success in many international conflicts involving issues between Middle Eastern regions because people are forcing the issue. People are going to their elected officials, they're protesting in the streets, they are complaining on university campuses and saying, we want you to pay attention. And they are paying attention. But if your public sentiment isn't there, if in other words, the people aren't saying, hey, you have to pay attention, then nobody's going to pay attention to you. Last point, competing priorities. This is a fun one because as advocates, we want everything to get done everywhere all at once. And if you've watched the movie, you can know how chaotic it is. When you're dealing with competing priorities, you really got to make sure that the team you're working with is aligned. And if you're part of a coalition, that they're aligned as well. Otherwise, there's way too much infighting. Truly, it's one of the biggest detriments that I think we as advocates face, the sheer amount of prioritization that takes place. So take a lot of time to really coordinate with your group, with your coalition, how you want to approach the situation. Because if there's broader sentiment to target what you might consider issue B first rather than issue A, well, maybe consider either a new team, a new coalition, or taking up issue B first if it means freeing up time and resources to take up issue A second. It's a choice, and it's a situational choice that you will have to ultimately make as an advocate. Okay, so let's go to the example again. This is what we have to consider. If we want to advance electoral reform, well, what does the political climate tell us? We're in the pre-election cycle. Electoral reform is going absolutely nowhere because all the parties, all of the officials, even the rare ones that are running independently, they all factored in their strategy based on first past the post. They're not changing that with a year, less than a year left. It is not happening. So sadly, the political climate isn't there. But like I mentioned, with public support, maybe we can force the issue. Okay. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of public support to reform the electoral system in Canada. Like I mentioned, everybody's priorities right now are on the cost of living. So you have minimal support from the political climate, minimal public supports. Is there potentially a synergy within our priorities that we can capitalize? Not really, because the competing priorities that you're kind of facing come from the top down. At the top, the leaders, they're thinking to themselves, well, we've made all of these strategies, our fundraising plan, our media plan, our campaign plan, they all center around first past the post. It's not in our favor to get our networks involved, to get our partners involved in supporting your initiative to kind of like achieve this form of electoral reform. So the competing priorities are really you versus them, sadly. And in this case, that dynamic just isn't in your favor, which is why, in absence of all three, the conclusion is that we're going to have to scrap this plan, at least in this electoral cycle. What I will mention is that once the federal election concludes, that's when we have an opportunity to actually take up the issue again. And in fact, most of your good advocacy, at least from a timing standpoint, should take place in one of two moments. The day after people get elected, or the cycle before the process starts, because that's going to give you the most time to win favor, to present your arguments, to gain support, and to change hearts and minds, not just of the elected officials, but of the public as well. So operate in cycles, in other words, is a better way of putting this, because if you operate in the cycle, you give yourself a lot of time and you give yourself the best chance of success. Okay, the plan. So let's talk about the plan a little. I think this is really exciting because it helps contextualize everything that we've been talking about. Perfect. So let's start at the what. The what is the basic question. What are you advocating for? And importantly, what's kind of the driving force behind it? When you're talking about the what, just think about that little diagram that I showed you with the two arrows, one for support, one for opposition. Which side are you on? We then get to the who. And the who is your audience. So here we consider the station, the visibility, the network, and the disposition, all four items under who. Then we get to the why. The why is really just the rationale. So you can think about what and why fitting together. Easy enough. Then we get to the when. The when is the political climate. So think about special days. If you care about Indigenous justice, then try to time your initiatives around meaningful days to the Indigenous community, like Truth and Reconciliation Day. If you care about youth issues, then maybe International Youth Day is going to be a better choice for you. Sessions also matter. And when I talk about sessions, think about legislative sessions. So the electoral cycle that I mentioned, prime time to target, obviously at the beginning. In addition to this, the sessions themselves have many periods. So if you're looking at a legislative session, what are we talking about? We're talking about the time in which your elected officials come to their local legislature to talk about issues. So here in Ontario, we have Queen's Park. We're looking at the calendar and we're asking ourselves, two things. One, when are they sitting at Queen's Park? And two, when are they off? Both questions matter a lot because they're very busy when they're sitting, making it very challenging for layman advocates to go up and get their attention. But when they're off, that's typically when they spend more time in communities. And it's amazing because, you can go to their local barbecue, you can go to their constituency office, and chances are you'll actually have time to talk to them there. So the sessions are another important consideration under the when category because it gives you that opportunity to communicate with them one-on-one. We then get to the where. The where is also a bit symbolic. So here you can think about what setting works best for you. For instance, if you want to protest, I'll give you a very practical example. So at Engage, we're looking at the federal government's plans to set up EV factories. And the first one was obviously with Volkswagen. Most recently, the announcement's been with Honda, but the argument carries forward. It's not a good strategy. It's a lot of wasted money. With very few jobs, with very little benefits to people, especially young people like us, because at the end of the day, what do young people look for in transportation? It isn't $70,000 cars that are affordable because they take, 20 cents per kilowatt hour to recharge? No, it's green transit. We want our green transit because at the end of the day, we can afford it, it's fast, it's sustainable, and did I say it's affordable? Because yeah, that matters a lot. So where would we want to take this issue? How does that factor into the where? Well, think about the places where all of these new EV plants are being built. Let's say you wanted to go there and have a little bit of a demonstration. Obviously very peaceful, very civil. And you show up maybe to Alliston, Ontario, the latest Honda plant, or the setting, the location of the latest Honda plants, and voila, all attention's already on Alliston, Ontario, because that's where it's going to be built. So you got the cameras, you got the recent political attention. You have, like I mentioned, that camera, the media attention, and it's perfectly timed because it's a very new thing. It's a hot topic, if you would. So that's kind of how you factor in setting into your advocacy strategy. Okay, let's talk about the how to kind of wrap things up before we get into our first activity. And for the how, here is what we are going to really cover in the delivery. But to give you a bit of a primer, the delivery is going to involve a number of different mediums that we can use to communicate with our officials. The first is meetings, one-on-one, you show up, you say, hey, this is what I want you to change. Here's my call to action. Here are my arguments, the end. Then you can have campaigns, right? Think social media campaigns, think mass media campaigns. These are the kinds of things that we want to factor in. Protests, very common. We've seen them over the last couple of years. Nothing too crazy. Definitely take a bit more organizing. But these are the kinds of hows or delivery methods that we want to consider as we kind of go full circle on our advocacy plan. Okay, more on that to come. Don't you worry. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us in activity 1. I am just going to back out very quickly to walk you through the template. So what I want everybody to do here is kind of take some time. Let me just share my screen again. Can I change it? No, I cannot. I'm going to have to do it again. Okay. Voila. Zoom in. Okay, so this is the template that I'm referring to. In this template, we are looking at 1 box, 2 boxes, 3 boxes, 4 boxes. 4 boxes, wonderful. And each of these boxes is really going to help you articulate what your advocacy strategy should look like. At the very top, I want you, obviously, make a copy of this template. Don't actually doodle inside of it. But once you make that copy, write out your policy topic. What do you want to talk about? What is the issue, etc. So just write it out there for your reference. You're then going to move to the why. So why should the policy topic itself be implemented or discouraged, right? It goes back to that support or oppose dynamic. Here, this is a bit more advanced, but I think that it's still helpful. It's something that we certainly use on the day-to-day. Think about the rationale, right? So you're presenting a reason to defend why the topic should be opposed or supported. Has this been applied before? Chances are it has. And if you have access to that information, which is most often than not public, then you can fill out these two boxes. So if your rationale has been used before, for instance, we've talked about EVs. EVs are not necessarily the best path forward to greenifying Canada's transportation system because they are expensive, because mining strips natural resources and ruin landscapes, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if your rationale consists of those arguments, it's been used before. So you just fill it out here, you're good. Then you can kind of talk about the impact. So the impact of the rationale, was it persuasive? Did it move the needle on an issue? Is, I don't know, Volkswagen, for instance, moving out of Ontario? The answer is no, but definitely document the impact here. Then we get to the next box, the how. So how can you actually get support or opposition to the policy issue? And then again, so you fill it out, bullet points, you write it out, and it's the similar approach. Has this been used before? Yes, no, in what context? Okay. Then you talk about the key characters. Who's going to show up? Who's going to help you address this issue? Again, bullet points, write it out, and then the kind of context supporting previous strategies that have been implemented with the same actor. And lastly, the when and where. You should kind of set this up. Are you going to go to Alliston to protest EVs? Are you going to do it on, I don't know, National EV Day? That's up to you. But I leave you with this information so that you can make a copy. I will put the link in the chat and I will stop sharing. Okay, perfect. So Pragya, could I just get some support with the meeting rooms? The breakout rooms, I should say.
Of course, yeah. So should I do 3 rooms? That should be fine, right? The
Let's
15
see.
people I see here.
Yeah, I think 5 works.
5 or 3?
So we can do, you mentioned 3 rooms. If we did want to scale things down, so we have 5 groups of 3, that works too.
Okay, perfect. Let me do that. Done. I'm opening all rooms.
Awesome. All right, welcome back, everybody. How was the session? Did you all make great progress with the template? Seeing hearts, thumbs up. Awesome. Awesome. I mean, we definitely have some time. So is anybody keen on presenting their findings, their approach to advocacy? If you're all a bit camera shy, I totally get it too. Okay. Template is fantastic. Okay. I'm glad to hear that. Perfect. Okay, so we can definitely skip by the presentations. I'm just going to share my screen again. Voila. Can everybody see it? I'm seeing some nods. Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much for completing the activity. This has been wonderful, and I hope that you get as much use out of the templates as we do. So now that we've talked about the planning, we are now going to discuss the learning. This is going to be the second lesson that we want you to take away from all of this. So what do we need to take away with the learning components? Let's start at the beginning. When we are learning in the context of advocacy, we are specifically looking for dissonance. So that's kind of like incoherent ideas, hypocrisy, if you would, in the actions and promises of officials, whether elected or not. typically elected. Why does this matter? Because we want to learn what they stand for, what they are doing, and what the relationship is between them. Okay, this is super important. Let me flesh that out a little bit more. As we consider what the dissonance looks like and what the discrepancies are, we're also going to want to highlight the interests, key interests, the priorities, if you would, that the officials are setting. And there are many ways that we can identify this. For instance, if we wanted to look for, kind of like what the priorities are, what priorities are being met, what priorities are given priority. I know it's like Inception. We're going to have to look at some key areas. So public engagement is probably the best way for you to get this information because it's public. It's out there. You can just kind of Google it and you'll find it. Super easy. Where do we look though? We can start by looking at the very beginning, the campaigns. Every time not you, but like an elected official comes into office, they had a campaign preceding them, big or small, typically big. And you can see their platform is still going to be live even after they enter office. You can go through the websites, see what they were promising, maybe kind of like tune into some of the speeches that they had, and check out their social media as well. All of this is public information, and it is very valuable to you because it sets up that dissonance. You now know what they stand for. Great. Are they following through? The second area or group of activities that you can look into is the political activity itself. So here we're looking at bills and motions, kind of the creme de la creme of political society. What are they passing in terms of the rules? These are the bills and motions themselves. And if you do have any questions about this, then happy to take them at the end, because I know that this can be a little technical for some people. The second thing that you're going to want to look at is the voting record. And the voting record is outstanding. I'm kind of debating whether or not this is a little too controversial, but I'll say it anyway. There was one candidate, I will leave them unnamed. There was one candidate during the Toronto mayoral race who angered somebody so much that this individual or group of people actually devoted an entire website, and it's an amazing website. We can connect afterwards if you want it, talking about how they've actually voted against the very things they were campaigning for. And the website's incredible because it looks super official, it's super clean, and it's very well organized. So you just Google it. Again, we can connect, and you can see what the promise was, where the voting, like when the voting was scheduled, what the bill was, and any kind of like follow-up comments that they made on it. It's outstanding. If you don't necessarily care for this particular individual, then you can go on Open Parliament. And Open Parliament is a great website that you can kind of just do this very same work on and keep tabs on everybody. It is federal. So sadly, there is no Open Parliament Ontario or Toronto, but it's a good project to take up if you're interested. Nevertheless, if you're looking at their voting record, at their social media, like literally anything having to do with a political activity or public engagement of an official at a federal level, go to Open Parliament. It's great. The last thing, the meetings. You're not just looking for any meetings that they're having, because again, a public official's schedule is public information. You're going to want to look at frequent meetings, because at the end of the day, it's like, if I meet with an official, so what? I just met with them. If I meet with them every day, that raises some, maybe not red flags, but certainly yellow flags. It's a point of interest. If somebody else meets with them, like a donor, also yellow flags, point of interest. And you're going to want to look at the frequency more than anything else. If you can't find the record, the other thing that you can look for is the follow-up on social media. So public officials love to self-promote. And as a result, you can actually find them tweeting or posting on Instagram about who they met with and what the topic was. And you're like, okay, interesting. So if you're meeting with this stakeholder group on a near monthly basis, what are they actually contributing, right? And it doesn't really matter how big or small the stakeholder group is. That's already a sign of prioritization, which means that even if they're not contributing money, because they might be an NGO with very shallow pockets, they're still helping set some form of policy agenda, which is super, super important to note, even if it's a good thing. Because if it is a good thing, like let's say poverty reduction, you as an advocate now need to realize that you're up against somebody that, no matter how good the policy is competing for the attention that you want to get access to. So how do we navigate the situation? Well, if you are dealing with some form of NGO promoting poverty reduction, and you still want to book some FaceTime with an elected official, you're going to want to do one of two things. Either once we understand what the priority is, which is this poverty reduction component, we can frame, which is the easiest thing to do, we can frame our problem as a poverty reduction issue, thus creating alignment between the public officials' priorities, which are demonstrated by the amount of meetings that they attend, and our own. Alternatively, and I encourage you to not really do this for, advocates that are promoting good policy, we can point out the discrepancy. And so whenever we are trying to schedule a meeting, you could say, well, listen, I've been trying to get a hold of you for months, and you keep dodging me, but you keep prioritizing this group. It only works if you have the data to back it up. So if you can have a collection of their tweets or posts, it helps. If you have access to the schedule, it helps. Otherwise, you're talking to a brick wall. But with that information on hand, that makes it so much easier for you to say, look, there's a clear discrepancy. I'm a constituent. I would like to meet with you. And we'll get to the kind of like the consequences of people's actions a bit later, but if these requests aren't met, it's going to become public information, right? That you're kind of maybe neglecting some constituents and favoring others. So there does have to be tact and responsibility behind that approach, but it is a way that you can kind of get their attention and prove to them that you're noticing some patterns that could be a little upsetting. Okay, so we have learned kind of like what to keep in mind, what to prioritize, where to look. Now I want to talk to you about alignments, okay? So this is the third lesson, number 3 over here. How could we achieve the alignments? I kind of teased it out, right? If you're dealing with that NGO promoting poverty reduction that's monopolizing the time, we've aligned our approach. We considered framing our issue in terms of poverty reduction. So this is kind of like the mutual gain. It's a priority that the official has, it's a priority that you have, and we are presenting it as a way that we can both win. Fantastic. The second element was that consequence that I was telling you about. You never, and I do want to kind of like flag this, you never want to come out and say, listen, if you don't do this, something bad's going to happen. And I'm not saying that you're going to threaten their family or anything. That'd be absurd. But like, you don't want to come out and say, hey, guy, I'm going to make sure you never get elected. And trust me, we heard this a lot. I heard this a lot when I was a consent assistant. And it was absurd because people would come in and they'd rant about nonsense. Sometimes the claims were legitimate and they just didn't understand that it was super, super like difficult for us to book the amount of time that they wanted. But maybe, a 10-minute chat would have really gotten the job done. And when you're talking about the consequences, you take them as they come. So if they do threaten to withhold their vote, you're going to say, okay, we understand, we appreciate where you're coming from. But ultimately, we kind of need you to understand that this isn't really going to move the needle. No elected official is going to come out and say that to your face, but that's what I need you to understand if you ever want to consider that argument. So what actually matters? What can you actually do to demonstrate the consequences of their inaction? What you can realistically do is start coalition building. So coalition building is super, super important because at the end of the day, we're stronger together, okay? And with that lesson in mind, the coalitions that you build can't just be the smear coalition because as sensational as smear politics are, it's not sustainable. You, sure, make them look bad, but guess what? You now lost an ally. You wanted them on your side the whole time. It's not going to work out now. Moreover, you've posed yourself as a threat to the same people that have aligned interests. So you're not just a threat to this particular official, you are a problem to maybe their party, to maybe their donors, to people that are well connected. That's not to say that you shouldn't ever kind of like point things out and label problematic things as problematic. It does mean that you should obviously resort to a less hostile approach first because we want to invite people in. So again, the main lesson, consequences. How do we demonstrate them? Okay, the consequences that we want to demonstrate really come down to 3 things. First, public discontentment. Essentially, are your voters going to be happy to know that you're not really prioritizing this issue? So now you don't personify it. You're not saying, oh, I'm not going to vote for you. Now you're making it clear, I wonder if they'll vote for you. And you do want to frame it that way. You don't want to say they're not going to vote for you because you can't guarantee that. But you do want to start putting doubts in officials' minds. And it's best if you can back it up. So don't just say that out of haste and anger. Conduct your focus groups, conduct your surveys, and kind of have demonstrable evidence that that claim is legitimate. Second thing, support. Support for an opponent. Classic strategy if you want to demonstrate consequences. When we're supporting opponents, we don't necessarily want to go to the opposite person, okay? If you support red and you're like, oh, I'm going to help out your opponents, I'm going to vote blue. That's not going to help you either because you wanted to support red for a reason. So what can we realistically do? Well, guess what? Every election cycle, there's a primary. And at the primary, multiple reds, multiple blues, multiple every color come together and compete against themselves. So wouldn't it be fortuitous if we could get another person of the similar stripe and greater supports to potentially come into office? There are ways to do that. You could volunteer for their campaign. You could build a coalition around their particular set of policy issues. And all of that engenders the type of support that gets people a little hot, and not in the good way. It makes them sweat a bit because they can realize that they're vulnerable, that all of a sudden you can actually amass a group of people to come out against them and in favor of somebody else within their group, but not necessarily across the aisle. Okay. Third way that we can demonstrate consequences, dissonance. This goes back to kind of the previous lesson that we talked about learning. So we want to demonstrate dissonance. If you notice that the official had all of these great speeches, all of these great posts and great campaign points, but they're not following through with them, well, guess what? You want to point that out. You want to say, hey, man, I want to book a meeting. I want to talk to you about this issue. You campaigned on this issue. Let's do it together. And if they're not doing it, if they're not giving you the time of day, well, then this is a great opportunity for you to say, well, you're not really the ally that you presented yourself as being. And again, you want to tease it out. Wouldn't it be disfavorable if your constituents were to come to that same realization? Again, we're not threatening. We're not making mean claims. We're not acting in a hostile manner. We are simply making it clear that there are consequences to not supporting good initiatives. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's move into our second activity. Now, based on the templates that you filled out, you kind of have a better sense of who to talk to, what you're doing, why you're doing it, etc. So now I want you to think about who you're going to align your goals with. So in the who column, I hope that you were able to put down some officials that you wanted to advocate with and get on your side. So let's think about how we can align their priorities with ours. Once again, at the end of this, we're going to have one speaker if they want to volunteer their strategy and to kind of share with the group. But otherwise, we're going to have 10 minutes. So I think we can come back at 1:11. Perfect. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen.
Oh, you're unmuted, Dale. You're muted, sorry.
Perfect. No, thank you so much for that, Pranavi.
No worries.
Welcome back, everybody. I know that I said that we would take some time to present our discussion, but given the time, I think it might be a little better if we just kept moving forward with the content. So we'll have plenty of time at the end, but in the meantime, let me just hop over back to the presentation. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so at this point, we're nearing the end. We have learned how to plan, how to learn, how to align, and now we're going to learn how to deliver. So 4 parts. The delivery. We need to have 4 things in mind, our 4 considerations. The first is visibility. If you joined us at the beginning, you're no stranger to visibility. We want to work with people, with elected officials that are very visible, because visible people mean visible issues, and visible issues mean more of an opportunity to win hearts and minds. The second thing is disposition. Once again, we care about the level of support of the official. Even if they're the most visible person, maybe they're the prime minister, if they don't really care about the issue, if they haven't really been a champion of the issue, if they don't come out and support you, they're not going to be helpful. So always keep that disposition in mind. The third thing is timing. So you're going to want to make sure that all of the issues that you work with are timed appropriately. We've spoken about the electoral cycle. We've spoken about legislative cycles. So those are the key things that you want to keep in mind when delivering on your particular project or advocacy initiative. The last thing is resources. And resources are very important because this is a new topic that we haven't really covered. So when we're talking about resources, we can really think about the human, so your team, your coalitions, etc., the people that are behind you. But you can also talk about your financial resources. So this could be capital. Do you have money to buy ads? Do you have money to pay for space? Do you have money to pay for the equipment that you might need? So those are the two categories of resources, both human and financial, that you want to weigh as you're considering how to deliver your particular advocacy deliverable or medium. How could we do this, though? We do this through mediums. And as you'll notice based off of these chevrons, each medium incurs a higher level of intensity by cost, by visibility, by disposition, by timing, by resources, right? They all get progressively more intense. So if you want to keep things light, if you want to make sure that, things aren't too visible because, you're dealing with a supportive person, you're already talking to an ally, it doesn't really have to be the most visible thing. Schedule a meeting. It's not resource intensive. You just kind of like take a bus, you show up, you're talking to the person. The next level would be a town hall, right? The town hall is definitely more visible because you could potentially have cameras there. And even if you don't, you have at least a couple dozen people. So you're amplifying the network of supporters. And even if there aren't supporters in the room, you're amplifying the network of spectators who vote, spectators who may come out and support, but you're making yourself more visible. The resources are still very low. The disposition might change, right? So what one elected official promises in private, once they are now in public, that disposition could change. And so you could use that to your advantage in several ways. You could kind of use it to force the issue. And for instance, you come out and you say, hey, I'll give you an example. So I was at a conference a couple of weeks back. Mayor Chow was giving a talk. Come question period, we had the opportunity to say, hey, you had this very ambitious housing plan that you were campaigning on. Where is it? It kind of dropped off the map since you came into office. So let's get the ball rolling. And because it's been fairly quiet at City Hall for a couple of months, really, having that opportunity at essentially a town hall to force the issue gets them to now add to the public repository of information that you can then capture and represent. We can expand on that in just a moment. But moving on from this, we have protests. So a protest could be very small scale. Like you could literally just show up to the person's constituency office and, be like, you aren't doing what you promised you were doing. And it could also be massive. Like you could have people on the streets, people at the corners, people on the highways. Yeah, it's a thing. But protests obviously incur more resources. They're very visible, which we want. The disposition is generally going to be low. People are not going to support protests, and they'll give you countless examples of people on the road closing lanes. It's going to anger people. So keep that in mind. If you personally don't mind being disliked, think about how that's going to affect the movement, because at the end of the day, the movement is bigger than you. So you could be like, oh yeah, I'll get in people's faces, I'll get them upset. It's like, no, think about how that's actually going to affect public support. Because at the end of the day, it's public support that matters. It's public support that's going to get elected officials to vote for your initiatives, to support your initiatives, to fund your initiatives. So keep that in mind. Marches are just an extension. Marches are even more resource intensive because now you have to coordinate, right? It's not just like, oh, me and 10 buddies, we call each other, we say we're going to meet here, we're going to protest. No, it's like now you're going through streets. And if you want to do this legally, you're going to want to get a permit. So that's more time, that's more resources. You now have to pay for a police presence. So as you can see, things start to add up. And then lastly, you have campaigns. Campaigns are really on both sides because they can be very low budget. Like you could have a national campaign with a budget of one laptop and a couple dozen hours, if you're a skilled, media savvy individual. Or most likely, you will have a very expensive campaign, a campaign with billboards and teams that you have to pay with expensive equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the progression that you keep in mind. And you never really want to approach your strategy by saying, okay, I'll start with a meeting, I'll end with a campaign. No, always scale this to the level that you want. If you want something super, super visible, but you don't have the resources, well, the town hall might be enough. You might just want to force that issue. If you want something that you don't really have to time, the meeting is very low timing intensive. You just kind of have to schedule maybe half an hour, show up. These are more resource intensive, but I feel like I'm belaboring the point, so I'll leave it there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. With that, we arrive at our final lesson, which is compliance. Now, for compliance, the key lesson is this. So whenever you're engaging in advocacy, if you are paid to advocate, you need to register your activity. If you don't register your activity, you could get into a lot of trouble. And it's not, I'm not saying this to scare you, I'm just saying this to point out the reality in our political landscape. So what do you need to report? Okay, once again, if you are paid, if you are doing this on a volunteer capacity, it does not matter. If you are paid, you need to report any legislative initiatives. So if you meet with an elected official and you want to discuss a bill, and you're like, hey, buddy, I think that this provision is pretty crappy. I want you to get rid of it. Well, you got to report that conversation. Same thing with financial transactions. So for instance, if you're saying, I mean, not bribes, obviously, I think that's I think that is generally illegal. But if you're talking about transactions involving grants, for instance, you want to make sure that they give your organization a grant. Your organization is paying you, you're on their salary, and they say, go talk to them, go convince them. Yeah, that's lobbying. You got to obviously register that. If you're not being paid for that, there's some leeway, and we'll discuss that in the next slide. The third aspect is government contracts. So again, similar situation, the government is awarding money. Your organization pays you to go talk to them and say, hey, give us the money. You have to register that. And the last part is your third-party meetings. So this one, and kudos to the policymakers that came up with it, because once upon a time, if you went to the official and said, hey, my friend over here, they want to meet you, you didn't have to report that. You just brokered the meeting. But now, if you engage in that same dynamic, you do. And the reason why is because the lobbying commission doesn't want lobbyists or advocates to get away with putting the elected official and the person of influence together without exposing that, without making that transparent for other people to see and scrutinize as necessary. So knowing what we now have to report, what don't we have to report? Well, if we're doing this on a relatively small scale, the exemptions involve unpaid interactions. So if you're not paid to go communicate with a legislative official, you're solid. You don't have to report anything. If you spend less than 20% of your time lobbying or getting paid to communicate with officials, you're good. But be very, very careful with this because you can't use it as a cop-out. If, for instance, you're working 8-hour days and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do 1 minute less than the 20% time requirements, you could still run into some trouble, especially, and this is the key kind of like takeaway, especially if your paid position has a lobbying component. So for instance, if you are paid generally to do research, to do advocacy, to do political communications, and you still do those political communications less than 20% of the time, even on paper, you still got to be careful, which is why I recommend everybody that's in this kind of line of work of government relations to have those calls with their officials, not with their officials, with a lobbying commission at a provincial or at a federal level, depending on the level you're engaging in, and kind of hash things out very transparently. Say, hey, my contract states this. In reality, I do this. Do I need to report? Just bear that in mind. The last exemption is consultations. Consultations and requests for information, you never, never, never have to report that because it's meant to be public. It's meant to be open to everybody to participate. So for instance, the provincial government recently had a consultation where they invited the public to comment on a new bill that they're passing to tackle racism, improve mental health, and reduce fees on university campuses. So if you were paid by your group to make comments on that consultation, you're fine. Likewise, if your group pays you and you have to ask some questions, you're like, hey, government, I need these records. Them giving you the records is completely exempt. You asking the question, completely exempt. So these are some key points to take away. Okay, perfect. This brings us to the end. With activity 3, I just want to throw some quick true and falses out. So anybody could just raise their hand or unmute and speak out. But here we go. First question. Your donor wants to set up a meeting with your local MP and it follows through. The meeting takes place. Do you have to report this interaction? True or false? Who wants to give it a try? Okay, maybe a little too tricky, but hopefully it warms you up. This is true. This is true. As you'll remember, any third-party meetings need to be registered, so they need to be reported. And in this case, the donor would be the third party. So it's you setting up a meeting between two other people, right? That's what needs to be reported. Awesome. Okay, next question. Your job requires you to spend 1 hour a day, just an hour a day, discussing grant issuances. So just like grants that they're giving out that your company wants with elected officials. Do you have to report this interaction? I want to see if we can actually get some comments here. And you can feel free to type them out. I'm going to check the chat. Okay, no. I want to say false. Okay. I don't know if somebody said true. Okay, mixed feelings since it's their job. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to say this is false. So good job to those of you that said false. Why don't you have to report this? Because if you do the calculation, so remember that 20% time exemption, 20% of an 8-hour day is an hour 36 minutes. Okay. This is obviously well below that threshold. It is at least 50% below that threshold, or actually about a third. So because it's so low, you're good. You don't have to report that. One thing that you do need to keep in mind, though, is the nature of the conversation. Okay. The nature of the conversation matters a lot here. If, for instance, you are paid to secure the grant, then you absolutely have to report that, because even though it's well below the 20%, the intention of the meeting is to get the money. But if you're just chatting and you're like, hey, buddy, I want to get the grant. I got a couple of questions, and I'm doing this for maybe an hour a day. That's fine. It's fine. It's below the threshold. The intent isn't to influence. It is to gather information so you don't have to report. That is the nuance. Okay, last activity. So true or false, you are trying to secure a government contract. Ooh, and you are spending weeks soliciting information from the relevant officials. Do you have to report the interaction? Any thoughts? You can put them in the chat. Oh, we got one true. Okay. No, because consultation, we got another true. Okay. All right, let's find out. This is false. Why would it be false, though? Because remember what the last exemption was. The last exemption was consultations and request for information. This is just a request for information. And so, yeah, look, you're spending weeks doing it. But at the end of the day, if you're only gathering information, you are not trying to influence, this is going to be the key exemption, okay, that we need to keep in mind. So with that said, I want to have a little concluding note for everybody. In this presentation, you learned 4 things and 1 extra. The first thing was the planning. You've learned how to plan your advocacy goals by bearing in mind the 4 key components. So the visibility, the disposition, the network, and the 4th component, which you can refer to in the slide. That escapes me at the moment. And you also learned how it is that you can organize the plan centered around the 6 main questions: your who, what, when, where, how, and why. In addition to this, you learned how to identify officials' priorities and actually align, well, that's this lesson here, and align them to your own goals. This alignment is probably the strongest components and the most important lesson to take away, because this is really how you get people to buy in. If you're both doing the same thing, if you're both mutually gaining, then you've won. You've gotten their support. The last thing that you learned is how to deliver, and specifically the considerations that you need to keep in mind when thinking about whether you want to have a meeting or a town hall or a protest, etc. The last thing, the bonus lesson, is how to comply with lobbying requirements if you are getting paid to advocate, right? So if you're doing this on a volunteer basis, at a even nonprofit level, unpaid level, then you're solid. If you're paying staff or you yourself are receiving money to communicate with individuals, just understand that main distinction of what you're trying to do. Is it a request for information? Is it an attempt to influence a decision? If it is the latter, that you have to report. Okay, perfect. So with that, I will just give you a little link to our social media. And I think we're taking questions at the end. So we could probably, whoops, transition. Okay.
Thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Jael. I always envy how amazingly you present. So that was amazing, and I
Oh,
learned
thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, no worries. And I will be now sharing my screen. I guess we can perhaps just maybe skip the break just due to our time constraints, and maybe keep all the questions towards the end of our presentation, which Devon will be facilitating. Just do quick share my screen. Perfect. And do you guys see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pragya. So I'm just going to do a very informal presentation on photojournalism. So Dale talked a lot about the logistics and more of the content writing of, and also speaking with politicians and these type of people that like kind of in the realm of public policy and political science. And so I'll be talking more about content creation in terms of social media, but also what it takes and what skills are very important to take really good photos. And this could apply to also phone photography as well, which I know everyone always has their iPhone handy. And so you can also apply these skills to take photos on your phone as well. But I'll be focusing more on DSLR cameras. And so let me just get into it. Perfect. Just so a quick intro about me. So I actually have extensive photography experience and actually run a small photography business called Third Eye Photography. You can find me on Instagram. I do events, but I also shoot photos for nonprofit organizations as well. I've done events for OCIC, for University of Toronto, and also for UNICEF Canada. I recently finished a 6-month internship with UNICEF Canada, where I also used my skills in making short YouTube videos and also TikTok reels and taking photos for our events. And I'll be attending Carleton for political management and also put that in my resume as well. And I'm also a policy maker for OCIC alongside Dale and Devon. That's actually a photo I took at an event of our executive director, Kim, who's also on the meeting. And so that's one of the photos that I'll be discussing and how to take photos similar to that one. So a quick table of contents. So why photojournalism? So the importance. I'll be going through like a very, very quick crash course of the basics of photography and the different types of modes that you can take photos in. Techniques of capturing people, because I know we always take photos of friends, family, and like really pretty locations, but taking policy related events come with a bit more like a professional stance. And so I just wanted to give some tips on that. And I also want to let you guys know how you can use this knowledge in public policy settings. So the benefits of these skills. Just some quick apps and softwares you can use for editing, which I think are always nice to have on the back of your hand. And just very quickly, the ethics that I think you should also keep in mind when taking photos of a bit more sensitive topics. And then we'll conclude and go into Q&A. So why photojournalism and how can it be helpful to you? So I think straight off the bat, it's really nice to have skills in visual storytelling. I know a lot of us tweet, we write captions, and we post on LinkedIn and Facebook about events that we're going to and social issues. But I think visual storytelling always pulls the heartstrings of people. It always it's easy to communicate complex stories using visual storytelling. So I think this is extremely important, and it's a really strong skill set that people can have. And it's also an easier way for youth to get into advocacy. I know a lot of the people in political roles always appreciate when youth, especially people out of high school and going into the university life, they tend to have stronger skills in social media and technology. And so it shines a spotlight on social injustices, especially through photos. And I think this is a really it's an easier pathway rather than, you know, writing the formal letter or trying to meet someone in person. So this is just a different avenue. And so this is the quick crash course. So I'm just going to teach you about like the main things of a DSLR camera. So here I just have 4 things. It's kind of like in the square. And so of course the power switch is important, but the mode dial, that's something that I'll be talking about, where you can take your photos in automatic, but also manual, and what are the benefits of that. The main dial is actually where you can change your shutter speed, which I'll be talking about very soon. And the shutter button is, of course, how you take the photo. And this presentation will be given to you guys, so it's pretty accessible to see and also learn. A tip that I usually tell people is that you can actually rent DSLR cameras, and you can rent it for a weekend or for however long you want, and you can actually learn with actually not having to buy and make the commitment, because I know they can be expensive. And so I want to go into like the main thing of this presentation, which is the exposure triangle. So this actually helps create a nice picture, and it comes with 3 components. So the first one is aperture. So it controls the depth of field. So how blurry do you want the background, or how in focus do you want it? And ISO is actually kind of the main component of how much light is going into the camera lens. So that depends on the environment. So you're going to have a lower ISO if you're shooting outside. So if it's like a public event where, just for an example, the mayor is doing a barbecue for his, you know, his constituents, and you're shooting outside, you would want a lower ISO. But if you're doing it in like maybe like a public library where it's a bit darker, you would kind of ramp it up to a higher number depending on the camera. And shutter speed, so this is motion. So you would usually use a higher speed if it's maybe someone talking and you will just want to capture them at the right moment. That's pretty important for speeches, for people walking into like a space where they're doing something. And you can have a lower shutter speed if, you know, it's more of like just a group sitting down and there's not too much movement. So this is like the 3 most important things to keep in mind when you're shooting in manual, where you get to make all the decisions and nothing is set by the camera itself. So this is just a couple of examples, because I know it's easy to talk about, but it's even easier to see. And so I'm going to go through shutter speed first. So here are examples of what it does through the camera. So because it's 1/60th of a second, it's a lot sharper. But if you change it to 4 seconds, it's going to capture in all that light. And so it's a lot more of like a milkier effect. And when it comes to people, it turns blurry. So you're going to want to make sure you're in that 1/160th, kind of in that frame. ISO, as you can tell, pretty straightforward. It gets darker if it's lower, and it gets a lot brighter if you have a higher ISO. One thing to keep in mind, if you want your pictures to be nice and clean, and you don't want it to have noise, which is kind of like a grainy effect, you would want to stay in no more than 1,000, unless it's like the best camera and you know you've spent a lot of money on it, then it's able to go higher. But usually the cameras within the 1,000 range, it's better to stay lower, because you would want them to be a lot more clean and not blurry. And then aperture, as you can tell, in f2, this one's a bit confusing because it actually goes opposite. So the higher you go, the more is in focus. So this I would use during a group photo. So I would change all the settings if I know for sure that's going to be a group photo. So I would change to 10 and change the ISO as well. And f2 would be for when you're taking maybe a portrait of a politician, and you know it's only going to be a single person, and you want everything in the background blurred, because it's not always easy to find like space where no one's there. So you would change to f2. F2.8 is a very famous number that people use. That's usually what the cameras come with, but it even goes until 1.4. And the lower it goes, usually the camera is more expensive. And so usually we like to stick around 2 and 4 but group photos and large events are always taken better in F10, and even F12 actually. So now I'm going to move on quickly to automatic versus manual. This is an example of what it does. So when we first start off, we like to use automatic because the camera does all the settings for you. But if you can tell in the left photo, it's overexposed because it wants everything to be in focus and clear in the photo because that's what the camera is trying to do. But if you want more of like a sunset look, you would want to change it to manual. And what you do is bring the ISO down and the shutter speed higher because the bird can move at any minute. So you want to capture it very quickly. So shooting in manual is always the way to go, but it's always easy to switch to automatic just to learn the settings. So those are the two modes that you can change it to, and that would be done at the top of the mode dial that I showed in the diagram before. And this is tips on photo composition. So make sure you're ready to capture key moments. It's always pretty important to ask maybe an agenda of the person organizing the event of what's going to go on. Be ready for speeches, for different type of activities to make sure you don't miss out on anything. So that I think is pretty important. Utilizing rule of thirds. So when you don't always want the person in the middle. You don't always want full large groups of photos just because you want to create some type of diversity and you want your photos to look complex and interesting. So maybe putting the person to the side and having like maybe the background with people listening. And so using rule of thirds, I think is very effective when you want complex pictures, and also including diversity, not always taking photos of the same person, but trying to capture different points of views. You tend to see a lot of that when you go through social media posts of politicians, where you see them shaking hands with someone that you probably wouldn't have seen maybe in person. So you want to capture those type of moments, which usually are hidden and not seen as obviously, rather than you would see the same faces on the news all the time. So including diversity always helps with photo composition as well, making sure you're capturing the right people, but also people who aren't always represented as well. So I'm going to move on to the third part, which is techniques for capturing people. It's not the same just because people always tend to talk and do a lot of movements. And I think there's a lot of techniques that go into that. Preparation and planning is always the number one thing I do. It always prepares you the best. Maybe getting to the event location early, figuring out, how your lighting situation is going to be, how many people are arriving, and also analyzing your environment. Is there a lot of light coming in? Is there maybe where you have to move a group of people to take pictures? That's always pretty important. Post-processing and editing, making sure that the people that you're taking photos of are well represented. So it's not people closing their eyes. It's not people doing something that you might not want to post. Like if you're working for a specific politician and I don't know, like they're just not in the photo or they're in the background and they're not really doing anything to help the photo, maybe not post that one. And also candid photography. I am guilty of this. I tend to like more photos where everyone's kind of posed and they're together and I know what they're doing, but candid photography is a skill in and of itself where you capture everything at the right moment because it's kind of like anything can happen. So you kind of have to be ready for that. And I think a tip for that is just having your shutter speed a bit higher because you can just freeze the photo quicker. And also your shutter just goes a lot quicker so the photo's captured. So that's just 3 tips that I thought of. So how can you apply this knowledge in public policy settings? I always say that if you learn any type of skill, put it down on your resume that you think is important, because I've applied to a lot of jobs before and a lot of people know this. Internships, I always hear them say, oh, do you have any photography or content creation knowledge? So you might not think it's important to put down on your resume or CV, but put it down. I think that's what I would say for youth. And volunteer to do content creation. I feel like when you bring it up, it's something that organizations and youth related events think about. And so advocate for that and tell them that you're willing to do it, and you can actually increase your visibility as well. And you also get to freely express your thoughts. If there's something that you want people to see and you want people to be aware of, I think photography does that really well. And also bring awareness to topics that matter to you, the organization, and you do it in a visual manner. And you get to also connect with, like-minded people, and also professionals through your social media posts. I know I've had a lot more engagement in my social media posts when there's photos, and I've met a lot of people that I think I wouldn't have met if I didn't post. And so just speaking from experience, I think that's always worked. So those are just a couple ways where you can use this knowledge, but I think the biggest one is the first one, putting it down on your resume and just trying to master that skill and keep learning. And this is just some examples that I have of photojournalism. So I actually just looked at like all my social media outlets, and this is some that I found were pretty interesting. So the first one is off LinkedIn. You see that there's an event going on, and it's a shorter caption. It's in 2 languages, but the photos really speak to how many people were there, how there were speeches going on. This is from my local university, where you see students doing an event with a professor that came to campus. And so you see how people were engaged, and you see how this association is doing good for their students. And so it really highlights what's going on campus, and to be aware of these events. The next one I thought was actually one of the best examples. It was actually during COVID-19, where you see how like you see the real life examples of, like, through a photo of the consequences of not seeing like your family and friends during the COVID-19, especially the quarantine part. And so this actually won a prize as well. And so I think this is one of the best examples of like photojournalism, at least in recent times. I'm keeping track of time here. I don't think it's too off, but very quickly, photo editing and post-production. So after you've taken your photos, you usually have some time and leeway to before releasing your photos. So how can you make your photos look better? I remember I had a photography teacher once tell me that the less editing you do to a photo and the more you play around within your camera before shooting, I think always makes the best pictures, because you always want them to be authentic and natural as possible, especially when it comes to these type of events. And so this are some of the ones that came to mind. So Photoshop, Lightroom, Snapseed, and also Capture One Pro. A couple of them do have free versions. I know Photoshop does, if I believe there's like a trial, but Snapseed for sure is free. But my favorite is Lightroom. I feel like it's very user-friendly. It really edits your pictures nicely. And there's a lot of tools that you can use where you can highlight one specific part of the photo, do your basic cropping, which I think all of those tools are now on our like phones just with the updates. But I think if you just want to go a step further and want to also master those skills, I know Lightroom and Photoshop actually have tutorials within their software that you guys can check out. But and quickly, ethics. So thinking about photojournalism ethics, I just wanted to mention 3 key principles that I tend to follow. And I think this is a very like short list just for the sake of time. There's so many other ones, but accuracy and truthfulness. I think sometimes photos can also, it's almost like sending a text to someone. It can be taken out of context. So making sure that you're presenting it naturally and you're not, I think a good example is cropping out something that you just don't want seen. I think that is not accuracy. And so avoiding that. Respect for privacy and dignity. I think the best way I do this is whenever I'm going to events and I know for a fact that I don't know everyone at the event, and I don't know for sure if they're comfortable being photographed, I would always just quickly ask them before shooting, or maybe tell the organizer if they can just do a quick announcement, if they can just make themselves seen, where we know for a fact that they don't want to be photographed. So that's one way that you can do that. And accountability and corrections. I know this is a bit more true for like captions, like where you might write something incorrectly and you can change that. But I think taking accountability for that always makes you a bit more of an authentic and someone that people want to follow, because you would take accountability and correct your mistakes. And I think that's pretty important as well. But those are just 3 key principles that I wanted to mention. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to my very quick presentation. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. So sorry, I just saw the chat, so I'm so sorry if I missed anything. But if anything, I'm gonna pass it on to Devon. And if you do have any questions for Dale and I, no problem, you guys can shoot.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda V. There's a lot of points where even I didn't know how to really navigate a camera. I have a lot of friends who have great skills in journalism and great experience taking photography for certain events to pursue their advocacy initiatives. But I definitely learned a lot.
Thank you.
So with that being said, do we have time for a brief Q&A? Maybe if there's somebody has a question or so. Dale.
Yes, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
One of the areas that I struggle with a lot in post-production is color correction.
Okay.
And I love Snapseed because they have that tool where you can toggle
Right.
which stream of light you can actually manipulate.
Right.
And try as I may, I can never get the gist of it. So do you have any tips or tricks to make color correction more intuitive? That's
Yeah.
something that we can apply across different pictures.
100%. I know with the actual camera, like the DSLR, there's actually something called Kelvin. So that's where you get to actually choose the customization of the exact number you want for white balance. And so it actually stems from 2 colors. It's either yellow or blue. So I think the best example is it really depends on the lights of the room. So I guess I'll use the library example again. Usually they tend to have more yellow lights, especially if it's an older library. I don't know if everyone's been to like the Toronto Public one, but through the camera, it tends to come out as more of a yellow color. So all it is to do about, literally it's in the name, like the balance of light coming in. So if you're seeing that the location is a bit more yellow when you're taking the photo, go into your setting and you can actually change to the light. Like you just tell the camera what lighting is in the room and you can change it. But if you want to customize it, you can actually just play around with the Kelvin, which is what it's called, and just try to make it more blue. So what it does is you're telling it to just balance it within the photo. So just read the room in terms of what lighting's being used. I tend to always have this problem outside. I'm okay with lighting inside, but outside the sun is just like never on my side. And so that's a bit more harder to navigate, especially when there's shade as well. And so play around with Kelvin. Maybe the camera doesn't do too well with like the automatic settings it has, but I feel like what always helps is going through the like it starts from the thousands. So if you're like 3,000, it actually gets more yellow, the photo. And the higher up you go, so around like 4,200, you get more blue photos. But it tends to balance out. Like the people aren't blue. It's just the location. But you can also play around with it on the iPhone. Like they have the white balance in there, like as one of the toggles. But I think that's the best way to work around that. I don't know if that completely answers your question, Dale, but
It does help. Thank you so much.
no worries.
Any last questions? I'm happy to answer.
It's putting me on the spot. You guys can ask Dale as well.
Yeah, I want to say first, thank you so much for this event. I feel like I really learned a lot, so thank you all. I guess I just have a general question for like if anyone has advice or thoughts, but I am wanting to learn more about policy and gain skills in advocacy. My background's in social work. I graduated from my social work program last year, and I'm working in nonprofits, but I'm just, yeah, curious if you have any advice for people looking to learn more about policy and kind of gain more skills in advocacy in that way.
Yeah, I mean, tons. So let's maybe narrow it down to the specific kind of skills that you're looking for.
Yeah, I guess for me, I currently work with a nonprofit, in their communications and advocacy department.
Gotcha.
do-
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of like initiatives for supporting youth and specifically queer and trans youth,
Okay.
tackling like anti-hate initiatives. So I think part of it is like advocacy with people and like
Mhm.
you know, countering like transphobia and homophobia in communities, but also part of it is thinking about potentially like government advocacy or like things that could
Yes.
increase the
No, I
capacity.
got the perfect book at least. I mean, books are limited in the way that they can present information. But one of the ones that has helped me the most is called Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. It is an excellent read, like mandatory reading for anybody that does communications work, because it really walks you through a lot of the fairly nefarious tricks that governments have used to stymie very good policies like trans inclusion. And you can reverse engineer them because it's essentially a playbook. Like it shows you what they used to ruin the world, but you can also use that in reverse. You can use that to legitimize a lot of very important things like queer and trans rights.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I think another avenue could also be looking into similar organizations and connecting with them, seeing if they're doing any events that you can maybe take part in as well. I think that's also a better way of maybe meeting them in person, where it's more of like a public setting. But I actually did not know about that book, so I'm going to check it out as well. But yeah, thanks for that.
And to both of Dale's and Renovi's points, we were actually discussing this in one of the breakout rooms, but I've always heard the slogan, a little saying, your network is your net worth. So that being said, on to Renovi's point, it's really important to be able to get into those circles and how to do that, especially as a youth, maybe not knowing how to navigate these types of organizations. Try to narrow it down maybe to a specific issue, and then see what organizations, what nonprofits attend to those issues. If you have the time, they're always looking for volunteers, and if you're able to contribute in that way, that's fantastic. If not, there's other ways to contribute your time, even if it's something as simple as signing up to a newsletter. Just obtaining that type of information is super crucial, just to understanding these issues, and then that will just help yourself become more knowledgeable and your advocacy efforts. It's a lot of fun, and I see in the chat there's a lot of great resources, but really, the folks that I bet, they call themselves policy wonks, like policy nerds. They're very supportive, very friendly. And for the most part, everybody wants to help out each other. So even connecting with them on different, social media platforms, LinkedIn, for instance, just giving them a quick shout out, a message for like a coffee chat, for instance, learning how they got to navigating their careers, what led to their interests, and seeing how you can apply their learnings and lived experiences into your own life. A lot of fun.
I don't know, Pragya, you put your hand down. I don't know if you still want to add something, just
Devon covered it, so
okay, perfect. Okay.
amazing.
Well, lovely. Okay, so with that being said, as we conclude our Blueprint for Change workshop, let's just reflect on the key insights we've gained. So we've learned that the importance of setting clear advocacy goals, and they're providing us with a roadmap to drive our efforts towards forward effectively. And then understanding the officials we advocate for is also very crucial. See, by learning about their priorities, their perspectives, and the decision-making processes, we can tailor our messages for maximum impact. Now, aligning our advocacy with the interests of officials, it increases our chances of success. So by demonstrating how our proposals benefit their constituents or advance their objectives, we also can garner their support. You see, crafting a persuasive call to action is essential for inspiring action and mobilizing others to join our cause. So by articulating our message compellingly and with conviction, we can rally support and drive change. And finally, we've explored the power of visual storytelling through captivating photos, enhancing the impact of our advocacy efforts and reaching broader audiences. So thank you very much for joining us today. And let's carry these lessons forward as we continue our advocacy journeys. I want to extend my gratitude to the Ontario Council for International Cooperation for immensely supporting this workshop. And we, the Youth Policymakers Hub at OCIC, encourage you all to carry forward the lessons learned and continue advocating for a world where everyone's voice is heard and every individual thrives. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Devon. That concludes our workshop. Thank you so much. I think Devon will just put in our LinkedIn links as well if you guys want to stay connected. If you guys have any questions that come about our content, and I think Pragya would be nice enough to maybe share resources as like the post workshop as well.
Yes, I'll do that for sure. Thank you everyone for joining in.